This is Dateline, News and Discussion. The topic tonight is censorship. It's a topic that maybe not a lot of people are paying attention to, but a topic that's affected people all over the world, including yours truly. My guest is a good friend. She's an American friend of Crimea, Lisa Savage. Lisa, you recently wrote a wonderful blog on censorship. We're going to talk about that, but first of all, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Regis.
Well, it's always a pleasure. Now, you started off in your blog talking about a screening you did when you were teaching high school kids just a few years ago. You showed them Laura Poitras's film about Edward Snowden, Citizen 4. Tell me about the reaction that your kids got to that film, and then we'll talk about the telecommunications companies and the United States government that are spying on everybody.
Sure. Yeah, it was interesting for me because these students really were interested in the film. They weren't particularly academic type students, but they were truly interested in a lot of the material we did in this elective. Their question after watching the riveting storytelling, of Snowden's escape from the clutches of the evil empire for being a whistleblower was they were like, oh, that was really exciting and cool, but what was the big deal about what he revealed? And I said, oh, well, it revealed that all the big telecom companies were spying on every American, every person using a phone within the US, far beyond every American. And their reaction, these are like 16-year-olds, 15, 17-year-olds, was like, didn't everybody already know that, Ms. Savage? Come on. So my perspective on my First Amendment rights and perspective on what rights they might have to privacy of their communications, what to expect, had shifted quite a bit over the generations. I feel like the Twitter files, Regis, is as significant a reveal as Snowden's reveals were. But oddly enough, or maybe it's completely manufactured, a lot of people in the US are treating it like ho-hum, with nothing to see here. I don't think that's true at all.
Well, let's talk about the Twitter files, the dump. Elon Musk, whether people like him or not, an awful lot of people, including myself, were happy that a great reporter, an investigative reporter, Matt Taibbi, was given these Twitter files, thousands and thousands of emails. And as you mentioned, a lot of people are just going, well, so what? Big deal. But I agree with you. I think this Twitter dump and the facts, the information that they reveal really should maybe take down the President of the United States and a lot of other people.
It's true. Originally, I thought the Twitter files were going to be about internal discussions at Twitter about how to game the algorithm, because anybody my age that has used social media, since early days, saw the change in what you see in your feed. You just didn't see the things you wanted to see anymore. And it was clear that somebody was fiddling with that. And that's, one thing that's good to know about, and of course important in our public discourse. But the Twitter files actually revealed something far more shocking than that. And that is that the US government paid Twitter, millions of dollars, and the various agencies, I guess the FBI in particular, spent untold personnel hours trying to get Twitter to mold the narrative of what people see. They weren't trying to catch human trafficking moguls. They weren't trying to, stop any big organ harvesting, anything like that. The FBI, they were not doing law enforcement. What they were doing was trying to fiddle with not only Twitter, but the other social media platforms as well, in order to get the narrative the way they wanted to in the run up to the 2016 election, in the run up to the 2020 election. The government meddling in that way and paying our, tax dollars to accomplish that purpose. Now you are clearly in the realm of the First Amendment and the right to freedom of speech. People have long since said, oh, Facebook or Twitter, they can squelch any content they want. They're not the government. That's not censorship. That's they can do whatever they want. Well, how about if your tax dollars are paying them to do that, and is it the government doing it? I think it's a very, very significant revelation that came out of the. I also want to note that it isn't just Matt Taibbi, who I admire a great deal as an investigative journalist, but actually the new CEO of Twitter gave this information just raw. Here's the Slack conversations internally at Twitter for the last, however many years, to several journalists. Some of them are journalists that you or I might probably not feel as comfortable about supporting their work. Regis, they're, more conservative, more right wing, but allegedly, they've all said that the only stipulation for them to get this data was that they publish their findings first. Whatever they wanted to report about this raw data had to be published first on Twitter, like a thread over they wanted with it. So I'm glad that Matt Taibbi was involved, but he certainly isn't the only one. And I've been reading his account of how it was, how challenging it was to even get a grip on, how to use it, how much he appreciated collaborating with other journalists who were working with the same big dump of material. But I think that what they've brought out of it is really quite significant. They've also covered how the government tried to control the discourse around COVID, and how it often insisted that esteemed doctors, clinicians, researchers, medical people would be silenced on Twitter because sometimes they were saying what the CDC was saying, but the CDC changed their tune every few days, so it's pretty hard to keep up. It wasn't just elections; it was other things as well, and of course the infamous laptop of the current president of the United States' son was also one of the many stories that were massaged, squelched, silenced.
Yeah. We'll come to the Hunter Biden laptop in just a moment, but I want to get back to what the FBI did. And the United States government, as you mentioned, paid for this. We paid for the services of the FBI. And even people like me were banned on Facebook, not Twitter, because I don't post to Twitter very much, but I was Facebook jail several times, 30 days, and over 550 of my films and videos were permanently deleted from YouTube.
And you aren't the only one that happened to, and that too is a shocking. And let's mention that that's Google doing that because they own YouTube. That is a shocking suppression of a lot of good content. And I'm again old enough to, we were brought up supposedly that like if you got all the ideas and you could hear everything that people were putting out there, then you could use your brain and try to decide what the right path was. Now it's like there are prohibited thoughts that you may not think, and
yeah,
that's not a country I live in.
Yeah, the big prohibitive thoughts have been COVID. If you even mentioned it or you wrote it in a description, they blocked it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, everything leading up to both those elections, if you tried to provide some alternative information, you were blocked.
Yeah.
Now, this is a lead-in now to the Hunter Biden laptop. This is huge. This is incredibly important. I tried to report on this before the election, Biden's election, and that was blocked. because I have been following Joe Biden's involvement and his son Hunter in Ukraine since the coup in 2014, when Joe Biden was Obama's point man, strategy man, implementation of United States foreign policy in Ukraine. And that stuff had been all over YouTube. And that information could not get out before the election. Let's talk about that. Trump even tried to get it out, and it was like a dud.
Well, the Democratic Party controls the media much more so than the Republican side of the uniparty system, I should say, does at this point. And they were, the media was really good and really stayed on message to just silence. The New York Post was the only publication that came out with the story of, and it was, Twitter used the pretext in squelching people's sharing of the New York Post. They banned the New York Post for 2 weeks from posting anything, was that it was hacked material. But it wasn't hacked because the laptop was left in a repair shop and never claimed, and nothing nefarious was, done to get into someone's system and get this information. It just came to light, and it was quite significant because it was about, bribes and, dirty business dealings involving the current president. So of course it was an October surprise that they were afraid would tank Biden's election, and the media and the social media is very much aligned with the DNC, the Democratic Party, conspired to quiet them. Well, they go, of course, when they really want to get rid of something, they say it's fake news, it's Russian disinformation, but it wasn't. And then eventually, once the election was behind them, it came to light, like other journalists came out and said, no, I've looked into this, that, there's really a trove of material on this laptop. It really does belong to Hunter Biden and so forth. But they were just trying to, fiddle with the outcome of that particular election. And so that it was important to do that. But I still think all this information management, in my opinion, Regis, starting with COVID, starting actually before COVID, when anti-vax became a politicized in a very negative way, and that happened years before we ever heard about COVID-19. All these things were leading up to basically, World War III is on. NATO's taking on Russia, China, Iran, and the Ukraine proxy war is the avant-garde of this particular militarism push. Japan is rearming under American pressure. Australia is buying nuclear submarines. I could go on and on with the evidence for the fact that we're in the run-up to a major world war. But the message discipline about stepping out and saying anything about Ukraine, even if you were parroting with the mainstream media, after 2014, there's all these articles saying Ukraine is the most corrupt country in Europe. Gosh, it really has a neo-Nazi problem. Look at all these, officials in the government that are, but even you might be saying that now, then you're silenced. This is Russian propaganda. We can't say that. It's not true. And they're just getting rid of it because they really need this toehold to entice Russia into what they think will be a losing battle. It isn't even Russia that the neocons are really going after, Regis. You and I both know it's China. But Russia and China, back when the Summer Olympics happened, said, we have each other's back now. So in case you were wondering, we have each other's back now. And maybe the other Olympics. But, not long after, Russia said enough in the Donbass, and we are going to protect these people that have been being shelled and killed by the thousands, and we're going in to do that. You can't say anything about the war in Ukraine that's not part of the White House narrative without being shouted down, banned. I've had my Google account suspended twice in the past few months, and all they say is that vague, you may have violated our community standards. All kinds of different Google accounts or, Google platforms doing things. I don't even know what my offense was. Was it saying something wrong about Ukraine? But I've been saying from the beginning that this, even including the Vietnam War, which I was old enough to remember as a teenager, the pressure to conform and not dissent and the criminalizing of dissent in this particular war is way beyond anything that went on with the Libyan war, the Syrian war, the Iraq war, the Afghanistan war, way beyond. Because they realized that the people don't want war, but Nazi propaganda said all you have to do is tell them there's a big enemy and it's an evil, evil guy, and they have to come together to fight him. And the whole setup of telling Americans that Trump was this hated figure by liberals, by Democrats, and that he and Putin were essentially one and the same. Was that not a setup to this message discipline around the Ukraine war? It just had to be. That many Americans, why would they suddenly up and hate Putin? They didn't even know who that was. Do you know what I mean? And she will be next because, Americans are constantly now seeing headlines, exact same type of thing. Facing China threat, Japan rearms. Like facing what China threat? I mean, the NATO's threat to China, or AUKUS, the oddly named AUKUS alliance threat to China. Where does China have 800 military bases around the world? Where does Russia have 800 military bases around the world? This is the US empire.
Yeah, I want to rewind a little bit and go back to Joe Biden and his son Hunter's involvement in Ukraine. You talk about criminal activity. People may not remember this, but I have done several shows. I put it in a film, starting with that intercepted telephone call between Victoria Nuland and the then ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Pyatt. And they were talking about the coup, who they were going to replace 2 weeks before the actual Maidan and the overthrow of the government. This is, I think, still on YouTube. I don't think they've deleted it. At least I have it. I downloaded it.
I think that clip is around. Yeah, I've seen it in several places.
Yeah. And the other thing is, Joe Biden was back in the United States and he was given a talk, I don't know, to some business group, maybe an oil company, I don't remember. And he sat on stage and he flatly said, very clear to everybody, and I told that SOB, Poroshenko, if you don't fire the prosecutor, Victor Shogun, who was an honest and good and professional prosecutor investigating not only Burisma, but corruption, and Joe Biden as well. And he said, if you don't fire the SOB, you're not going to get your $1 billion of aid that was promised. This is right on video. I mean, millions of people have seen this thing. This came out before the election. Lisa, this is bribery. I think it's also treason. And to have the sitting president now, then vice president, and his son involved in millions of dollars of kickback and payback, it's beyond me that this man is the president of the United States. Your thoughts on that before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, the president of the United States is not the decider, despite what George Bush said. They're just a celebrity spokesperson for the decisions that their very, very wealthy owners and operators make, and they explain them to us. Biden's been incredibly useful to them, I think, because of his creeping dementia. So no one can really take seriously what he says, or really even be sure what he's saying some of the time. But it's, our government is a mafia, Regis. They operate like organized crime. They have my whole lifetime. And they used to be much more covering it with this sort of air of patrician. We went to, Ivy League schools and butter wouldn't melt in our mouth. But now, especially since we had Bush and then 45 and now Biden, we're just getting tackier and tackier. There's no pretense even of any, nothing dignified about the US government. Let's put it that way. Our Supreme Court is a joke. At this point, Congress is a complete joke that Zelensky getting a standing ovation and giving them the battle flag. And that is, I mean, signed by, it's beyond, you can't parody it. It is a parody of itself. But, organized crime is very brutal, and they will crush you path if you get in their way. I'm sure the only reason I'm not kicked off YouTube is because I don't have enough followers. If anybody gets enough followers to be a threat, then, they have kicked off. I don't think Biden is any worse or any better of a president than we've had in a very long time. I was a little child when JFK was assassinated, and, it's really been downhill ever since as far as leadership of the US, of the empire. Arming for a nuclear war, and what they're really leading up to is propaganda, and it's already coming out. New York City Office of Emergency Services put out a video saying, well, imagine they dropped the big one. Don't ask how or why, just know that the big one has been dropped. Here's what you should do. Go in your apartment and put wet rags under the door. Stuff like that. Again, is this a Saturday Night Live skit? Or are there people buying this nonsense? I think people are buying this nonsense. I don't want to get too far into the weeds of US policy, but the No Child Left Behind Act killed social studies education in this country, and it shows. People do not understand even what the mechanisms of government are. And, a general strike is the only thing that can save us, in my opinion, because reforming this government, the US government from within in any branch, is not going to happen. And I say that as someone who ran for elected office, as a chance to get in the debates and say a few things about foreign policy that were not otherwise going to be said. But, the workers are starting in the US at least to realize, oh, we have a lot more power than we thought we did. They'll tell us we don't. They'll try to make us suffer if we exercise it, but we do actually. That's one good thing the pandemic did, was make labor much more powerful. So I think a general strike will break out eventually, and you bring at least some of this system down. I just really hope they do it before, they're trying to convince people that a nuclear war is survivable and winnable. Both those things are huge lies. The bombs we dropped on Japan at the end of World War II are minuscule compared to the nuclear weapons that, the US and several other countries have now. Why are we saber rattling our way right to nuclear Armageddon? Who will benefit from that? Even the wealthy who make money off those bombs. What are they going to do with that money after the whole planet is like radioactive ash, Regis? I just don't get that. Don't they have grandchildren?
Well, it's a good segue back to what you started talking about, this conflict in Ukraine. You talked about NATO. Basically, is just an arm of the United States Pentagon, the military, waging war all over the planet, as you mentioned, against China, against Iran, against Russia. This is a hot war. I know the definition of proxy, but the United States has been at this for my entire life, starting with Harry Truman, demonizing Russia, the Soviet Union, the evil empire, the Red Menace, the soulless country, and then bases surrounding, as you mentioned, Russia, nuclear missiles stored in Poland and Romania and in Germany, other NATO countries that I really don't know for sure, but they've controlled the narrative. The propaganda about Russia has been overwhelming, and the Russians are not even in the game in terms of the information war, the hybrid war. They're losing it badly. You can't get anything out that what's really going on in Russia, what's really going on in this war. But I want your comment on a couple of things. Yes, people should be very concerned about the gaslighting, about the possibility of a winnable, survivable nuclear war. It's total insanity. I don't know where these people are coming from. Everybody knows you cannot win a nuclear war. humanity and life on the planet, as you said, will become nuclear ash. The second thing, Lisa, and you've already talked about the gaslighting for the possibility of a nuclear war, it's more real because of an accident, a misjudgment, a miscalculation, or an error than it is for some nut job, some Dr. Strangelove pushing a button. But the other thing is this, Lisa, that I'd like your comments on. When people can rise above the American narrative, and it's the American narrative, demonizing Russia and China, making them the enemy, and Iran, what's really going on a macro level, a geopolitical level, is the real battle for control of the future order of this world, for the future survivability. It's between, as you mentioned earlier, Russia and China. Since the Beijing Winter Olympics on February 2nd, Putin and Xi made a public, powerful statement about how close their relationship is. They have said repeatedly, both of them, since February, after the February 24th intervention in Ukraine, how strong their relationship is. They have been working, both of them, with the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South America, plus many other nations that want to join.
Sure.
The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Russia is a partner to that.
Yes.
With China, for Asian countries. Both of these organizations are emphasizing their sovereignty and their immediate need to create their own international money exchange, basically eliminating the United States petrodollar. I read an article today. They're calling it now the future, the yuan, the Chinese money, yuan petrodollar, yuan international money reserve.
And
Lisa, your thoughts on this epic battle that's going on above all of the military confrontation of the United States around the globe? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up because, of course, we haven't even talked about the sanctions, the economic punishment countries we've named that are enemies of the U.S. empire, and many, many other countries suffer under. The U.S., that's their blunt instrument, and they've been using it for a long time. Look at how long's Cuba been under blockade, over 50 years, right? But the Ukraine war hastened them thinking, oh, we can just, we'll just put sanctions on Russia and that'll just destroy their economy. Well, it didn't destroy Russia's economy. It actually strengthened Russia's economy. Russia was ready for it. They knew that's what would come. And the US is always running around freezing. They even froze Afghanistan's assets. I mean, those people are really, a lot of them, super poor, literally starving. US froze those assets. Every time they do that, other countries go, ooh, we better not keep our assets in dollars, huh? And then, I read a good analysis a few months back saying right now is the struggle between global capital, which Wall Street and London, in the West are the head of, and global, energy, which China and Russia both have vast resources that, of course, the West wants to get their hands on. And the West has already spent the last several decades toppling governments or invading countries in the Middle East to get their petroleum assets. So the struggle is, and this analysis that I read said, but energy will win because you can print money, but you can't print, petroleum. And I thought that was an interesting perspective. The blowback of the Ukraine war economically has been really severe on Europe. Why Europe is just standing by letting the US blow up the Nord Stream pipeline to kill the gas connection between Germany and Russia that both countries had invested a lot of money and time in building, and they just sit around on their hands and say nothing. I read what I thought was a decent explanation of that. It said all the current leadership in Europe, your bright young things at the heads of government and the EU, went to school in the US. They went to undergrad school, or they got fellowships, or they were at a think tank, and so they are all under the empire. They're all playing that particular game. But economically, Europe's in trouble and the US isn't doing great. And the Ukraine war could very well be seen in retrospect as, man, that's where the US empire overplayed their hand, fell prey to the hubris that affects all the mighty, and they couldn't come back from it. It set in motion a lot of domino we're alluding to. All these countries now want to join BRICS. Russia and China are working much more closely together. China already has been working, for decades in the global south, really helping people economically instead of exploiting them like the World Bank tends to do. I can't remember who said this, but it cracked me up. When the British come, someone in Kenya, I think, said, when the British come, we get a lecture. When the Chinese come, we get a hospital. The strategies that the West has used, which is control and conquer and exploit, we're running out of planet. The global south is, thoroughly exploited, every inch of it. And there's no reason why the pendulum shouldn't swing back toward, populous countries than the US with better values, frankly. Both Russia and China impress me because their value is to take care of the people. That's what I would like to spend my tax dollars on. Instead, every single year, the defense budget, the Pentagon contractor, hog trough feeding gets bigger than the White House asked for. Congress fall all over themselves. They cannot give, Northrop Grumman and General Dynamics and Raytheon enough money. This is what happened to Japan in World War II. My Japanese friends, when I lived in Japan years ago, said, how did World War II happen? They were like, oh, the big business cartels wanted war. The people didn't want war. We were already kind of starving. And, nobody wanted to fly a kamikaze plane that didn't even have landing gear. It was the big business cartels. Here we are again. These cartels are making tons of money on weapons. Can't ship them to Ukraine fast enough. I just want to express some solidarity with the Ukrainian people. I know that there are Ukrainians that are, far right and scary folks, but there are a lot of nice Ukrainians, a lot of families and a lot of kids and people who've done nothing wrong. Really cruel of the US to use Ukraine as their cat's paw against Russia and cause so much suffering that will endure for generations when you lose, a whole chunk of your family. It's horrible. I hate having my tax dollars go there. I've always hated it.
Lisa, I want to point out for folks who perhaps are not familiar with you, you ran for the United States Senate in the state of Maine against Susan Collins. You attracted quite a bit of attention. You were the only one, in my opinion, in the country that was talking about really important domestic and foreign policy issues. I just want our viewers to know that. Now, I want to end on this, Lisa. Many people who watch my podcast know that I've been living in Crimea, which you can see Yalta, beautiful picture of Yalta behind me, almost 3 years now. And that's been 3 trips prior to that. And then the 4th trip, I decided to stay here. And I've been reporting on life in Russia, life in Crimea, trying to present the truth through my eyes and through my work. Now, this is my question for you, Lisa, to finish our discussion. I'm not back in America now. I don't have a sense of what people are feeling, except through friends like you and other friends of Crimea who I've talked to and communicate with and even had on the shows. In your opinion, do you think the people of Maine, do you think the people across the country are beginning to feel that something's not right?
Well, they've been beginning to feel that something's not right since all the industry left Maine in the 90s and NAFTA just, killed the manufacturing economy here. So working class got much, much poorer and have been struggling ever since. The poverty of families that I taught in where I live in Central Maine was shocking. And it had gone on for a lot of years. Do they think things are worse because of the Ukraine war? I don't think so. If all you do is watch sports on TV and you really don't have sources, I mean, Regis, you and I know you've got to work at being informed now. You have to go out and search for what you consider reliable sources and always be evaluating and asking, seeing friends suggest, oh, check this person, check this reporting. If you just passively let corporate America wash over you, man, are you numb? In Maine, numb means, not terribly bright. I would say, though, it's really misinformed. But most people are just trying to get by. They're working a couple jobs. If they have a medical emergency, it's bankruptcy. Their children are going to be worse off than they were. The prospects for, the younger generations you can't own a house on working in the service industry. Millennials go, we're not having children because it's too expensive. We can't afford it. People have known that things are economically wrong for a long time, thus Trump. But do they have a sense of how close we are to World War III and all out nuclear war? No. That's what the propaganda is all about. Like, what? Huh? They just think you're a tinfoil hat wearer if you're concerned about such things. I take great comfort from being in touch with people like you, Regis, and other people in our network that stay informed, are willing to look at the facts and share their thoughts, and have a compassion and a concern for the whole of humanity. I don't hate any Ukrainians or Russians. I don't even hate Nazis. I don't hate anyone. We're all human beings. We all have that, spark of spirit inside us. A lot of us are wrong and confused. A lot of us are in fear and pain, but those of us that can stay informed, that is our job, I think, in the 21st century, is to stay informed and communicate with each other.